quiet of this place and into this community of faith and intention. Just be still with that for just a minute. May the spirit that animates the world join us in this space today. Today is a day where we prepare for next week's Labor Day. If I was here next week, we'd be doing this, but we're not. Today is a day where values meets money, at least in the sermon. Today, greed and generosity, empathy and competition are all kind of talked about. Today in our nation, we mostly prepare for Labor Day, if you haven't noticed, by, back-to-school sales. People head into that last weekend. But while we enjoy that last breath of summer, you might argue, let's work not to forget all those who toil away paycheck to paycheck just to survive. Maybe you're one of them. And all those who worked hard to make Labor Day a thing. We're going to light our chalice with these very simple words. They come out of the Jewish tradition. In the Jewish tradition, it is said that if the temple cannot hear the cries from the street, the penitent cries from the people inside the temple will not make it into the heart of God. I like that sentiment. Thanks. Please stand in spirit or in body or both, or for 109, When We Come Marching, Marching. And this is a hymn that is based on a poem that was written just before the Bread and Roses strike in Lawrence, Mass, back in the early teens, turned into a hymn. International Workers of the World. It's a good Labor Day song. Thank you, Linda. 109. it's good that we're not in that working in a mill with kids climbing under a linen thing that could kill them. But people around the world are doing that. Thankfully, they're not. Thankfully, we should be grateful they're not us. The prayer today is kind of auditory in nature. It is, it's a demonstration of wealth and inequality in the United States. It's just a good, not about Labor Day exactly, but a good marker, a good way to flesh out what's kind of hard to always see. So I'm going to drop one BB into this metal bowl. The BB represents $10,000. Okay, that's what it sounds like. If you took all the private wealth in the country, cash, stocks, houses, anything above the waterline in terms of debt, right, private jets, whatever, any assets, divided evenly among the roughly 125 million households in the United States, it would sound like this. This is all the accumulated wealth in the country divided by all the households evenly. It would sound like this. That'd be about $700,000 each household in America would get. That's not how it's divided up. If you were to look at that of the bottom half of the American public in terms of income, right, divide that number in half, the average wealth of the lower 50% of people in terms of assets, not income, right, the average wealth would sound like this. Half the country. The average wealth of half the country is about $30,000 accumulated, with the lower quarter of our country being essentially in debt or underwater. Wealth isn't evenly divided, as we know. Good topic to talk about on Labor Day. If we're talking about individuals with that group, it would be about $400,000 per individual would be the overall assets of the nation divided evenly. If we were going to take the top 1% of the households in the country, the average of that is about 22 million of the top 1%. So the average amount the top 1% in the country has is $22 million. There's a lot of people with much more than that, and it takes roughly $2.9 million in assets. So say $3 million. If you're worth $3 million, you're right there at the lower end of the top 1%. Let's listen quietly to what that sounds like. This is the average of the top 1%. This is 2,200 BBs, or roughly that amount. Let's sit quietly with that thought. Give you a minute just to feel whatever it is you feel. Give you a chance to stew on what kind of problems that kind of wealth distribution, accumulation, inequality might result in as we prepare for Labor Day. Amen. It's now time for us to come forward and drop a stone into the water. Free spirit of life. Come unto me, sing in my heart those words of compassion, blowing the wind, rise in the sea, move in the giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. It's now time for our offertory. And in the spirit of the day, I invite you to gently reach into your neighbor's pocket or purse and give generously for the life and work of this great church. What happens next? Oh, okay. Stephanie? Oh, okay.
My job makes me crazy, I'm always behind, even though I am not one to shirk. And some fuzzy folk singer repeats in my mind that my life should be more than my work. Well, I like the work that I do. I don't mind earning my pay, but there's so much to do when the workday is through. Bring back the 8-hour day. Say you work at a white-collar job. You get paid at a fixed monthly rate, but you come in for meetings a half hour early. You're working a full hour late. Then you sit for an hour in traffic with the rest of the overtime drones. There's a latchkey kid you must chase off to bed before you eat a cold supper alone. Oh, bring back the 8-hour day. When did we give it away? There's so much to do when the workday is through. Bring back the 8-hour day. There's a factory worker we know. Joe Hill called him Mr. Block. If the foreman forgot him, he'd work till he dropped and he'd never punch out on the clock. Now they lay off 10 workers a week. Some are working half-time with no frills. Mr. Block doesn't care, he's got money to spare. Let the rest of the world go to hell. Well, did you know that the workers in Flint went on strike to climb out of this hole, where half the town works 60 hours a week while the other half rots on the dole? What good is a double-time check when your town and your family is shot? We need some enjoyment, we want full employment, we will not be bullied or bought. We say, bring back the 8-hour day. When did we give it away? There's so much to do when the workday is through. Bring back the 8-hour day. When I was a kid, Mom stayed home, and we lived on Dad's blue-collar pay. Our standard of living was decent and sweet, just as good as what I've got today. Now my wife has a good paying job. And me, well, I'm doing okay. But we're putting out 99 hours a week. Tell me who the hell's getting my pay? Hey, bring back the 8-hour day. When did we give it away? There's so much to do when the workday is through. Bring back the 8-hour day. They got cellular phones for your car. They got notebook PCs for your lap. If you crawl off to sleep, you stay close to your beeper. Now why do we stand for this crap? They tell you you gotta compete. No, we're tired from footing the bill. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. 110 years ago, in Chicago in Haymarket Square, they gathered from shipyard, from mine, and from mill, just to march in the sun and the air. They'd been slaving from dawn until dusk, but not on the 1st of May. 'Cause you can't smell the flowers when you're working 12 hours. So they struck for an 8-hour day. Hey, bring back that 8-hour day. Bring back the 5-day week. When did we give it away? How did it become an antique? I like the work that I do. I don't mind earning my pay, but there's so much to do when the workday is through. Bring back the 8-hour day.
This is pretty cool up here. If you haven't been up here, it's a really, really neat view of the church.
Yeah.
Stay out. Don't. It's scary up here. Don't come. I was afraid you were going to leave the bowl of babies up here, and I was going to go over there if you had done that. But anyways, I forgot my glasses. Pete, you want to hold this for me? Today's reading comes from Jim Wallis, an American evangelical Christian and political progressive. Let me say that again, in case that skipped over you. Jim Wallis, an American evangelical Christian and political progressive. I bet it took a minute to put those two together, in your brain, didn't it? Yes, progressive Christian evangelicals do exist. He is the founder of the Sojourners. Jim Wallis says that when archaeologists dig into the ruins of ancient Israel, they find periods when the houses were about the same size, and alongside them have unearthed artifacts that show a relative equality among the people. No great economic distance between the top and the bottom of society. During those times, the biblical prophets were silent. No voice of an Isaiah, Amos, or Jeremiah was heard speaking to the demands of justice comes from that period. But the diggings also uncover other periods when there were huge houses and little hovels, and the objects of life reveal great discrepancies. Not surprisingly, it was during these times when the prophets were most outspoken, denouncing the great gaps in wealth and the neglect of the poor. The Bible doesn't condemn prosperity, it just insists it be shared.
There is no choir anthem today. So, Labor Day, of course, as we said, conjures up weekends, barbecues, Labor Day sales, kids back to school. It's an excellent time to reconsider the question of the degree to which the economy serves people and not the other way around. Many things are good these days. We're certainly not, in labor strikes, each of us in particular, and we're not, I think I know. Wages are up as a general rule, and unemployment is generally low. Good signs. There's a constant threat, though, and a lot of blind spots that are probably worth sharing. Although wages have risen and parental leave packages are better than they've ever been, we have an economic system that, with technology and AI around as its new gift and weapon, are conspiring to move workers out of their jobs as fast as they can, and all their needy needs like workman's comp and health care and days off and maternity leave. Despite the general leap up in minimum wages, people receive, I know as a kid, I remember making $3.75 an hour minimum wage. You might remember 25-cent gas. As we head into the weekend, we should always sort of morally remember that unless you're in the top third income bracket, you're still being crushed with high housing costs, particularly in Massachusetts. High inflation is hitting people, and that is people who are not afraid that one more corporate downsizing isn't going to catch them. So we should be grateful. We're not dying of black lung in our 40s, most of us. The economy is not entirely unhealthy. Most of us here live in some kind of bubble, probably old enough to stop worrying exactly about the economy, but who knows? The pull of the curtain reveals some interesting facts. In an economy that's grown over the last 30 years, workers now who live in the bottom third of salaries, when measured against inflation, have been isolated from almost all the economic benefits of the economy. Almost all the benefits of our economy over the last 50 years have gone towards asset owners, if you're speaking generally. Think about that. One of, if not the most pragmatic answers as to why as American labor has been challenged over the last couple generations is that computers and telecommunications and better transportation opened up jobs that were generally isolated to us in that post-war boom. And that is a huge factor in terms of the labor force. But if you remember Paul Harvey, he'd always say that there's always the rest of the story. And part of the answer why the economy is hard on workers is that wealth inequality is sort of an invisible phenomenon. We don't watch it evolve and change like we would a sports event, like we would a pop star's rise or fall. The evolution of workers, that means, is not entirely televised. But probably more importantly, there's something in our culture that resists those truths being too fully known by us. We're implicitly taught as Americans to accept the basic moral wisdom of the economy by keeping the vast inequality largely unexamined. And what better than Labor Day to raise that point? For example, we almost never challenge the belief that wealth inequality is an inevitable natural part of a healthy economy, do we? We never really ask that. We just ask about the degree. If we were citizens and we were not actively discouraged or have given up on questions of inequality, why is it, if we were not numbed to this, why is it that over the last 50 years, corporate profits have gone up an average of 60%, and the gap between CEOs and workers has gone up over 300%? But in real wages, since the 60s, adjusted for inflation, the income of low-wage workers, the fate has gone down. Why is it when the vast majority of Americans work for a living, you might say, is there no outcry as to why the newspapers have a business page, but not a labor page? Not a crucial issue, but a symbolic one. Why is it that we virtually never hear that among the 20 most industrialized countries in the world, one of the most highly correlated factors is the degree to which there is equality and the degree to which there is a unionized workforce? During that time and during this inequality boom that's happened over the last 50, 60 years, the percentages of Americans represented by unions has declined. If we were not just a little bit psychically twisted about how to feel about our economic culture, we wouldn't talk quite so much about the romance of the pull yourself up from your bootstraps stories, while we ignore the far deeper part of the story that anyone's future income, is male or female, is as highly correlated to their father's income as any other measurable factor is. Just ask those questions, and you begin to reveal how kind of isolated we are from most of that talk. It's true, there's people around the world with rags to riches stories, and I stand here with a skeptical gaze not to suggest that they're not an incredibly important part of our narrative and probably not a really important thing to get a hold of for an individual. But collectively, their part of the story is pretty small. Historically, about 70% of the individuals on the Forbes 400 list started their lives with their parents in the top 5%. Right? 70% of people in the Forbes list start in the top 5% in their families. And 40% of people on the Forbes 400 list actually just inherit their way onto that list. Meaning, as we all know, there's heartwarming stories of grit and ingenuity. The deeper truth is, where you begin is very likely where you end up. Not terrible, but the truth. Sam Walton, founder of Walmart, worked hard, combined ingenuity and opportunity that he saw, willingness to take risks to build a retail empire. Sam Walton was an entrepreneur who smartly saw opportunities for growth where others didn't. In fact, he identified that there was an underserved working class of America in the retail world. He also, of course, willingly took advantage of a fast globalizing economy, one that, with one view, took advantage of wage imbalances, created a race to the bottom style wage war for those kind of jobs, and basically participated in the growth of a shipping industry that exploited the fact that pollution is an economic externality of consumerism that's terrible for the planet and unpaid for in our present system. We need to embrace that both can be true. Individuals thrive when they work hard and are talented and aspire. The culture works better when we cooperate. Because of Sam Walton's combination of 130 million Americans do. I invite you to just process that. Without any predetermined agenda in your head, if you can just sort of rid yourself of whatever it is you're thinking about and attempting to be as morally free and neutral as you can be, I want you to pause for a minute and ask yourself how the economy of a country that claims to be founded on Judeo-Christian values should work. And should it work like that? Why is this not discussed on the front page of every newspaper almost every day? Why is it that we can't seem to tell ourselves the whole truth about the economy and how it functions regularly enough to get it? If we as Americans were not sort of blinded by our own press clippings, why is it in the 60s, an era that we had the greatest level of equality in the 60s, all different areas of the economy grew right out of the war. During that time, we had a war on poverty. Yet now, at a stage when we have wealth inequality that's almost at the same level as the robber baron era and the roaring 20s, we're in a real conversation about cutting Social Security. Ask yourself, why is it we live in a country where 70 to 90% of the people find the Bible authoritative, and when the parts of scriptures, if you were to take the Bible, one of Jim Wallace's great tricks, is to take the Bible and cut all the parts out of the book that relate to charity or equality and any of those kind of things that we're asked to do to be faithful, that book becomes a tattered wreck that almost can't hold itself together. And then we have Christian nationalism. We have a group of people willing to hold back and slur those who are attempting to come to this country primarily to do jobs that we don't want to. Odd, right? Why is it that proportionate to our wealth and population, we are ranked lowest or among the lower end of the industrialized nations to participate in world food aid programs? Part of it is because there's little incentive for corporations and the big major media to tell us, that own so much of the media, to tell us these stories. But the bigger portion of that is that it's hard for us to hear that. That truth is difficult on the ears. It's emotionally hard to face, especially when we're in a fight for democracy, that money so influences people in Washington that in the late 90s, just to pick a statistic I came up with, one wealthy zip code in New York City gave more to congressional candidates around the country than did the entire population of 5 small states. Wealth and power, of course, doesn't want to lose, well, wealth and power. And Supreme Court Justice Louise Brandeis said, we can have a democracy or we can have a great deal of wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. We cannot have both. And even these ahs, or whatever they are really examples of the deeper truth that we as a country don't want to see. We don't generally want to face up to the truth and have the courage about the ethics of wealth and power. We find our economic issues that we probably should face are much more suppressed. It's an illusion that we kind of live under that quietly creates a culture of meanness that I think we see out there. The lack of both wisdom and transparency about how the economy works and how we tell that story threatens the future of workers, right? We need to keep that story alive. It was, after all, a concern for human dignity that drove the worker rights campaigns that brought an end to child labor and the 8-hour work week, 8-hour workday that we just heard about. As the bumper sticker suggests, support the people who brought you the weekend. If we're to embody our faith, we must see that enduring a safe workplace and decent pay is an expression of upholding the inherent worth and dignity of each person, right? Labor Day should be felt at least a little bit in the gut. I'm not saying don't enjoy the weekend, but it should be honored as a soul matter, just as a marker of the chance for us to transform ourselves. I'm going to quickly tell Gandhi's story. Before Gandhi was the Mahatma, before he was the loincloth activist that we know, he was a lawyer in Africa. In 1918, just 6 years after the Haymarket strikes, he returned home to India from South Africa, where he was working to engage in a minor labor dispute in the city of Ahmedabad. For a number of months, the plague had raged through a city, killing nearly 700. Struggling to keep their factories open in these dire conditions, the city mill owners proposed a plague bonus of 80% more wages to those who would work and remain on the job. When the plague subsided in the early spring, the mill owners collectively withdrew the plague bonus, as one might think they would. The workers were not happy, having literally worked through a plague, not unlike COVID, probably worse there. Not familiar, they were back to their miserable conditions. And the mill owners, when they decided to strike because the plague bonus was restricted, the mill owners locked the doors and invited only those back who would take a 1/4 pay gain. Gandhi entered the fray about this time. Drawn back from Africa, he worked as an organizer. He immersed himself in this particular little deal, generally considered inconsequential and small. Acting dutifully as a lawyer, he'd write strike bulletins and work in the mornings, and then he would go visit the largely illiterate striking workers in the evening. It was moderately effective. He was convincing enough to exact a pledge that they not return to work until they received a 35% bonus. To shore up their support, he would repeat a pledge with them every night when he came to visit. And they were kind of a ritual of the campaign. But as the strike zones droned on, the workers' resolve flagged, and they watched him come in a car, fresh from an evening meal and comforts they could not afford, and they began to distrust his leadership, his allegiance. He heard these murmurings, and immediately he decided to make a swift choice. Without hesitation, he rose and declared to the workers that he had breached their trust. Gandhi affirmed his allegiance by committing to not taking any food until the workers had received this 35% increase or he starved to death. In later years, he would recall this as a sacred moment where his faith was placed on the anvil. Gandhi's pledge, of course, revered by the strikers, created an elevated sense of the moment. Starving to death will do that. And not long into his fast, the rate of negotiations increased and the settlement was won. Gandhi's fast had stirred a consciousness in the workers, and it also had given a sense in his mind that vows and deep commitment could topple over a seemingly insurmountable authority, the British, as it turned out. Perhaps more importantly, Gandhi sought to view the negotiation as an act of ritual reconciliation. That's how he began to pitch it to the mill owners, in which his opponent was given the courage and the chance to change. The small appeal decided to strike at the soul. And it was at that moment that Gandhi decided great things could possibly be done in India. The very simple truth in life always, of course, as we know, is that the best of us always has a chance to take root. And the idea that our labor communities and our faith communities share so many values, so many core things, holds always a great potential that our society become one step closer to that beloved community that we envision. I invite you to stop a few moments over this weekend to think about those who fought for workers, are mostly in the same fight for justice that we envision when the world works as it should. So you use raising the consciousness about the struggles of vulnerable workers is an essential part of our call. Listening carefully to those who stand up for justice is an act of creating right relationships. And we, too, can remember that great things can be done. Just like our intentional efforts to confront racism and sexism and transgender oppression and all of that, workers are an important part of that. So, it's difficult for all of us to sort out the competing things that strike us in life. I know it is for me. Nevertheless, I encourage you to keep a portion, whether it's easier or not for you, to think about our mission, our 7 principles, and like Gandhi's, could become part of an act of reconciliation, a moral guidepost to topple the insurmountable authority that seems to be there with inequality. Let's hold on to the truth that the labor and the religious communities share such deep values that workers in this modern moment not become a victim and self-interest and greed that they're so prone to do. Amen. Our closing hymn is number 148, Let Freedom Span Both East and West, 148. Standing as you are willing and are able, standing in spirit, if not in body. Span both east and west, and love both south and north, in universal fellowship throughout the world. In beauty, wonder, everywhere. Let us commune and find compassion be the golden cord, close binding humankind. Beyond all barriers of race, color, caste, or creed, let us make friendship, human worth, our common faith and deed. And east and west will mercy wealth of good throughout the whole wide earth. We close our service and we extinguish our chalice with the words of the UU chaplain to Congress, I think the only one, Reverend Edwin Hale, who says simply, I am only one, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. What I can do, I should do, and with the help of God, I will. Amen. Go in peace.